Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. This tank behind me, that's my Emerald Tree Skink tank. You can kind of see them right there. I built this tank 3 years ago, but I never showed you how I built it. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how I built it, what it looked like when I first built it, and what it looks like today. Let's get started. First, let's start with the background. I wanted to use something quick and simple, so I picked up 2 of these cork bark backgrounds from my local reptile store and siliconed them in place. They're 18 by 24 inches, so 2 of them perfectly fit the background of this 36-18-24 enclosure. I added silicone to them and then used clamps and pieces of wood to hold them in place while the silicone dries. Once the silicone dried on the background, it was time for the hardscape. Emerald Tree Skinks are an arboreal species, so I used pieces of wood to create perches they can climb on. I tried several different pieces of wood till I found a scape I was happy with. I taped the branches to the top of the enclosure to hold them up, and then I used a little bit of hot glue to hold them in place. But I didn't think that the hot glue would be sturdy enough long term, so I secured them more firmly using silicone. Also, at the time of building this enclosure, I didn't have colorless silicone, and that's why I'm using white silicone. So once I had applied it to all the branches, I covered it with cocoa fiber to hide it and make it look more natural. I also siliconed cork tubes to the background that I was originally planning to use as planters. That idea didn't work out very well, but they now make great hides for the skinks. I then let everything dry for 24 hours and then removed the clamps and the tape. Now that the background and hardscape was complete, it was time to move on to the next stage. I added bioballs to create a drainage layer, put window screen mesh to create a barrier between the hydroballs and the substrate, and then added the substrate. Also, I should mention, I cut a small hole into the mesh and put this plastic tube through it into the drainage layer. If the water in the drainage layer gets too full, I can use this plastic tube to drain it. That being said, I have never had to use this in the 3 years that this tank has been running. I then used this ABG mix from my local reptile store Critter Jungle as the substrate and put in about 3 inches of substrate into the enclosure. I also used a small rock to cover the opening of the plastic tube and then covered that with the water bowl. Okay, time to start planting. First, I put a Hoya into one of those cork rounds I mentioned earlier and used these pieces of stainless steel to pin the Hoya to the background. The goal was to get the Hoya to root into the background and grow upwards. That did not go according to plan, and that Hoya did not survive. I did plant another clipping of the same species of Hoya into the substrate, and that clipping has survived and is doing well today. I did add a bunch of other plants into this vivarium that also didn't survive, like this variegated creeping fig that I was hoping would take over the background, Spanish moss that also didn't do great, and I glued some air plants onto the branches that also didn't do great. I think from the original plants that went into the vivarium, only the Ficus elastica, the Dieffenbachia, and the Hoya survived. This is what the tank looked like when I first planted it, and this is what it looks like now. I have over time added a few new plants that were more suited for this environment, and they're all doing great. I added the Cebu blue pothos that is taking over the background finally, and I added this Rhaphidophora, which I think gives the vivarium a very jungle-esque look. The Ficus elastica and the Dieffenbachia I've had to trim several times over the last 3 years to keep them at the right size for this enclosure. Once the planting was done, I then added leaf litter on top of the substrate and connected the vivarium to my mist king system. Next, I decided to move the water bowl over to the other side of the enclosure and use this big rock to cover the plastic tube instead. I also decided I wanted to give the skinks a larger platform for basking on. I should have done this in the beginning with the rest of the hardscape, but better late than never, I guess. I decided where the heat lamp was going to sit, attached a piece of cork to the background and the side of the enclosure to act as a basking platform. I feed my skinks a mix of insects and prepared crested gecko diet, so I also added this feeding ledge to hold that crested gecko diet. I then added springtails and powder orange isopods to the enclosure as a cleanup crew. For heat, I used an Exoterra compact top terrarium canopy with a 50-watt bulb to create a basking temperature of about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Emerald Tree Skinks are a diurnal species as well and need UVB. For that, I'm using the Arcadia Shade Dweller. The enclosure is also sitting on my rack where I have a Sunblaster LED to light up the enclosure and grow the plants. This is what the vivarium looked like when I was done, and this is what the vivarium looks like now, 3 years later. It's one of my favorite enclosures in my reptile room, and I think the skinks are pretty happy in here. I hope you all enjoyed this build video that I should have put out 3 years ago. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions about the vivarium or Emerald Tree Skinks, let me know in the comments and I will get back to you. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.